What shirt's he wearing today? All right, when you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe. And we got a picture of a guy drowning. Obviously, he didn't want it bad enough. Now, one of the things I want to talk about real quick is strength. A lot of people have no definition for strength. Therefore, without a definition or no way of clearly defining what it is, they can't effectively put together a strategy designed to make it better or to improve or to get stronger. I mean, how successful can you expect somebody to be that is designing a strategy to get better at something that they don't fully understand? Probably not too successful. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you about what strength is, what it can be defined as, what components will go into making you stronger, and what you actually don't want to do. So, the first thing is, what is strength? Strength can be defined as your capacity to produce force in a given movement. I say a given movement because strength is very specifically developed. It is a skill. It is the result of skill acquisition through stress and repetition and practice that you get better, and thus your capacity to produce force during a given movement is improved. To illustrate this point, you can see some guys in the gym that are very strong on machines and some guys in the gym that are very strong on free weights. But the guys that are strong on one generally aren't strong on both, or not as strong as another guy. So you have some guys that can, lift like 5 plates on hammer strength machines, but they can't do 5 plates on a barbell. Now, yes, it's not apples to apples, but you'll find a guy that could do 3 or 4 plates on a barbell, and he's not doing 5 plates on the hammer strength. You can find some guys that can squat a shit ton of weight, but they can't leg extension or leg curl as much as the guys that do leg curls and leg extensions more than they can squat, and they can't squat very much. So strength is a very specific skill that is acquired. Now, if it's defined as your capacity to produce force on a given movement, the next thing we got to talk about is what limits your capacity to produce force. There are 2 components, your muscular system and your nervous system. So your capacity to produce force during anything is the result of your brain and body's ability to work in synchronization to produce force and to produce fluent and efficient movement. So, now that we know what those 2 factors are, we can sort of break down how we would go about developing them. Most people would test their strength by performing a 1 rep max, lifting as much weight as they possibly could for one, because if you can only lift it one time, that's your max strength. And they would think, well, if that's how strong I am on that particular movement, if I want to get stronger, I should keep testing my strength. But what a lot of people don't know or realize, or they just don't view it the right way, they don't frame it the right way, is that a 1 rep max is nothing but a test. So I'll give you a couple of examples to help understand this concept further as to why you shouldn't do 1 rep maxes to get better at 1 rep maxes. You're going to need to do them periodically to see where you're at, but they should be used as a test. So one example would be with an athlete. Any athlete can relate to this. I'll give you a couple of sports examples. Sports provide, almost all the time the best analogies. A basketball player. A basketball player will practice between games elements of their game that need the most amount of work. So when they face certain situations in the game, they're as prepared as possible to deal with said situations. So a good example would be someone who's terrible at free throw shooting. If they're terrible at free throw shooting, what they do between the games is they practice their free throw shooting so that when they face that situation in the game, they can hit their free throws. Hockey, you have, when a guy gets a penalty, one team goes on the power play, one team goes on the penalty kill. It goes to 5-on-4 or 5-on-3, depending on how many penalties there were on the play. And anyways, so what happens is one team's at an advantage, and you would think when it's 5-on-4, you're at enough of an advantage that you should be able to score a goal. But a lot of teams don't do very well in the power play. Their ability to convert, as in score when they have a man advantage or 2-man advantage, is very, very low. So in practice, what they do is they work on their power play. In either of these sports or any other sport you could think of, you don't go to practice and play a game. You don't say, okay, we got a game Tuesday night, we got a game Friday night, we got a game Sunday night, so we're going to play our own game with ourselves Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. No, you're going to work on the elements of your game that need the most work so that you're successful when you face certain situations in the game. The game is the test to see if you've made improvements or not. Now, obviously, you're dealing with an opponent. The opponent is going to change, so your strategy is probably going to change based on their strengths and weaknesses. But the point is that the test is to see where you're at. Then you go back to the drawing board and you practice different things based on where your strengths and weaknesses lie so that you can overcome the next challenge. This is how you need to view your training, especially when you're trying to get stronger, because your workouts shouldn't be tests. You wouldn't go to school and you have a test coming up and say, okay, you know what, I got this test coming up on Friday, it's Monday now, so I'm going to get my hands on as many other tests as possible, and I'm just going to do test after test after test so that I'm ready for the test. No, you're going to ask what's going to be on the test. You're going to know in advance based on whatever course you're taking, what material has been presented to you in the previous weeks or months or whatever. You're going to know where your strengths and weaknesses are, and you're going to know based on that what you need to study on so that you're as prepared as possible when you go to do the test. And that way you can get the best mark and get the best result. So strength training and training for a max is the same way. Your training should be based on getting better at the max, and you're not going to do that by just doing maxes. You're not going to get better at that by just doing more tests. So we've limited it to that your capacity to produce force during any movement is limited by your muscular system and your nervous system and their ability to work in sync. So if you want to get stronger, you want to maximize both of those compartments or elements or whatever you want to call them. Now, the muscular system is pretty simple to understand. The bigger, the stronger the muscles are, the greater their capacity to produce force is. You got fast twitch fibers, you got slow twitch fibers. The fast twitch can produce more force. So we're going to want to manipulate our training around maximizing the size of those muscle fibers. As for the nervous system, you got 5 elements or 5 aspects that contribute, or 5 neural adaptations that contribute to producing force. You got recruitment, rate coding or firing rate, whatever you want to call it, inter and intramuscular coordination, and then you got inhibition. So I'll talk about those elements, and then we'll talk to you about how you go about improving them. Recruitment is simple. Muscles are recruited as they're needed. So the heavier weight that you lift or the faster that you try to lift, your body and your nervous system is going to perceive that the demand is higher, and it's going to recruit more fibers. But it can only recruit so many. Once it's recruited all of them, you have nothing left to recruit. So your strength is kind of capped or limited by max recruitment. You can, however, recruit them faster. The faster they're recruited, the more force you can produce initially, the more momentum you can generate, and then the greater chance of success at performing the lift. And generally, a beginner gains a lot of strength quickly, just like they would in any sport, right? In any sport, hockey, basketball, those 2 examples, a beginner would get good by just playing the game. They would get good at doing the test. But there will come a time where their strengths will start to show and their weaknesses will start to show, and they're going to have to design what they do in practice to get better at those. What you do with an advanced lifter who's very good at recruiting their muscles is we need to teach them to recruit them faster. In fact, that's the one main neural adaptation that will contribute most to an advanced lifter getting stronger. From there, you got inter and intramuscular coordination. Intra means coming from within the muscle. Inter means the coordination of the muscles working in unison. So intramuscular coordination, you need the right muscles to fire at the right times, at the right amount to produce the most efficient and fluent movement possible. Intermuscular coordination means you need all the muscles to do what they're supposed to do. They all have a job. Some muscles' job is to produce force. Other muscles' job is also to produce force, but for a different reason, maybe to stabilize a joint so that a different muscle can produce the force to do the movement, because stability is a prerequisite to force generation. So some examples of muscles there would be the rotator cuff of the shoulder. Those muscles are responsible for stabilizing the top of the arm bone in the shoulder joint so that the other muscles around that joint can produce the force. In the hip, you got the deep rotators of the hip. They're not going to contribute much to your squat or your deadlift, but they indirectly will, because they will stabilize the hip joint so that the glutes, the hamstrings, and the quads can produce the force to do the movement. So that's how intermuscular coordination applies to producing maximum force. And then you got inhibition. The body has a built-in governing mechanism to prevent itself from, tearing muscles or getting hurt. And most people, because of this, built-in governing effect that we have, can only display or showcase 30 to 40% of the strength that their muscles could potentially produce. So you want to limit or reduce this inhibition effect. And you'll do this. There's a few strategies to this, but lifting heavy weights is obviously the way to go. So those are the 5 neural aspects. And now that you know what they are, I'll teach you how to make them better, and you'll also understand further why 1 rep maxes are not the way to do that. Now, if we want to make the fast twitch fibers bigger, we need to understand that the energy system that they rely upon is called the anaerobic lactic energy system. It tops out after 20 seconds. So those fibers are only going to really produce maximum force for up to 20 seconds. Now, a weight that you can lift for 20 seconds probably indicates like a 4 or 5 rep max. That might be too light. You're not fully recruiting as best as possible. I mean, you might be, but you could go a little bit heavier. You could go, as long as you lift probably roughly 90% of what you could lift, or a weight that's slightly heavier than what you could lift 4 times. Now, this is highly individual, but for most people that would probably apply. As long as you're using a weight that's that heavy, you will maximize the neural adaptation as far as recruitment goes. And the benefit to using, weights on the lower end of that spectrum between, 90 and 100% is that you don't want to overwork your body's capacity to recover. The heavier the weight is, the more demanding it is, the more recovery you're going to need from lifting that weight. So if you lift on the lighter end of the spectrum, number 1, you could perform more reps. The more reps you perform, the better you're going to get at it, because strength is a skill that is acquired through stress and repetition. Number 2, it's less demanding, so you can recover from the work. So you can perform more work, you can recover from more work, thus you can perform more work again. And that's going to contribute to maximizing the neural adaptations. Now, the rate coding, the inter and the intramuscular coordination is all going to be developed through stress and repetition as well. So that's another reason why you want to use a lighter weight than what you could use for your max. Now, it's not to say to go to failure every single time as well, because you want to practice perfectly. Perfect practice makes perfect. You practice like shit, you become shit. So that's another thing you want to take into consideration, is you also don't want to be going to failure. If you can lift a weight 4 times and the last rep is a grinder, that's good, because it's going to teach you how to grind out a rep. But if your form falls apart while you're doing it, your nervous system's recording that, and you don't want to have to unlearn something later and try to relearn something else. It's going to be very, very difficult to do. So the way you're going to develop strength and maximize the neural adaptations is by using roughly a 90% load in relation to how much you could lift one time, performing a limited amount of reps to limit the amount of fatigue. So, because fatigue's going to obviously negatively affect how you perform your reps. You don't want to be just grinding them out as best you can. But you make up for the limited reps by performing more sets, higher volumes of work. As long as you can recover from it, then you're in a good place. More practice, more recovery facilitates more practice, and you're in a good place. So, using a weight that you could lift 3 times and stopping at 2, but doing multiple sets of 2, the time under maximal tension will accumulate and will have a positive downstream effect. To reduce inhibition, one strategy would be to use supermaximal loads. So if you could squat, 300 pounds or 400 pounds, put on an extra 100 pounds, and don't do a full squat. Just come like, an eighth, or maybe a quarter of the way down. And you're not doing this to build muscle. This is a strategy. By contrast, what happens is when you're lifting your 300 pounds or your 400 pounds, however much you could do, you have a reduced level of inhibition, because your brain and nervous system already knows you can handle more than that. It's been subjected to more than that. So that's one way that you can sort of limit the inhibition. In closing, strength can be defined as your capacity to produce force, which is limited by your brain and body. You want to get stronger. You need to make the muscles on your body stronger. You're going to do that by using a load that is heavy enough to maximize recruitment, but light enough to facilitate more volume of work to be performed. And you're also going to want to maximize the neural adaptations which is pretty much done the exact same way. It's not done by working up to a max all the time and constantly lifting your 1 rep max. Your 1 rep max is your test to gauge how much progress you're making. If you want to get really good at 1 rep maxes, then you're going to want to do them periodically to see where you're at and to practice doing them. But strength is not built that way. Strength is demonstrated that way. It is showcased that way. It is displayed that way. And since strength is a very specific skill, you want to limit the amount of effort that you put into multiple exercises, and in fact limit the amount of exercise that you do so that you get really good at the ones that you want to get stronger at. Now, if you liked this information, feel free to share it. It's fucking free. Failure to share this with somebody that you know that might benefit from free information is pretty selfish, and I mean, I'd really question how good of a friend are you? But that's neither here nor there. Click the fucking button at the bottom, subscribe to the channel, and I'll keep bringing it.